You're listening to Joy Coaching America with the Joy Coach, Karen Lynn Grant, spreading upbeat, uplifting, informative messages of hope and happiness from sea to shining sea, from our home in the beautiful Rocky Mountains.
Welcome to Joy Coaching America. This is Karen Lynn Grant, and today I have the opportunity, the honor, and the privilege of interviewing Dr. Trace Tanner. Dr. Tanner is an author. He's a life and relationships coach and a retired university professor. He has decades of experience as a counselor, speaker, lecturer, and retreat leader with many appearances in the media. He and his wife, Susan, co-authored the book Central to the Thriving Marriage Relationship System, which is available at familyresourcesystems.com. Today, Dr. Tanner, I'm so happy that you are here with me. I love doing this. I love the interview. I love the stories that you're going to share with us today. It's so exciting to see what a person's background is, what motivated them to go into the field. Sometimes it's a catalyst from a wound or something that happened in childhood that leads us into why we would love to be a coach and a mentor for other people. And I have recently been interviewing coaches, but this is the first marriage coaching course that we're going to be discussing today. So thank you, Dr. Tanner, for being here with me today.
Of course, I'm delighted to be here with you.
So excited. So first, I just want to ask you, what prompted you and your wife, Susan, to write the book that you have created an entire course to help so many marriages around the world?
Well, I need to put this in the context of other career things. I chose to go into the field of strengthening families because I felt that was my calling. I was prompted to do that. What motivated me was a little bit different from so many therapists. I happened to have grown up in an exceptionally positive, functional family, and I decided, well, I have things to share with other people so that they can have great family lives too. That was my prompting. And when I entered the field, I discovered that lots of therapists came in the field for the opposite reason, because I'd had really serious problems. And so
We're
I was
looking for answers for
right.
themselves.
So I wasn't such a good fit. But anyway, that I got into that field, and I could tell you more about that. But let me go back to more specifically on the book. So I had a more or less a dual type of a career. I taught at the university, and I was a therapist. Most of my time I was in San Diego. But
A teacher and an educator and a coach.
Yes,
a counselor.
there you go. Yes, counselor, and then that kind of evolved into coach, because I really found that my approach, even as a therapist, is I was not a shrink, I was an expander, which is more like what coaches do anyway than what a lot of therapists do. So point is, that was a very comfortable fit for me. What happened specifically with respect to the book is I was teaching at a university, and what I'd been teaching classes which incorporated things associated with marriage. Those were some of the units in my family relations courses and so forth.
What university?
Well, I was teaching at the University of Utah and BYU Salt Lake Center.
Okay,
and
great.
so those are the places I was teaching at that time. But then I'd made the determination I was going to go back to San Diego to reestablish my practice there. But my wife said to me, well, Trace, you've been doing all this stuff on marriage. Why don't you write a book? And my response to her almost immediately was, I wrote a dissertation. I'm a speaker. I'm not so much of a writer. I don't necessarily enjoy writing. And then her comeback was, well, Trace, I'll help you write it. Bing.
Because she's a writer?
Well, she was my wife. Number one, the thought that occurred to me that having a marriage book written by a husband and a wife team, it'd be better than a marriage book written by a single person of either gender, or a person that was just from their point of view. But number two, and this is more important perhaps, she wasn't a professional writer, but she's very good writing and editing skills. And what wound up happening, I knew that because this was not something I loved to do, that I really needed some help. what happened with the book is I would dictate these big old long paragraphs, kind of along the lines of what professors do. They tend to be a little bit verbose and detailed. And so I'd dictate a big long paragraph, and then she would say, okay, how can we make this more succinct, more to the point, easier to understand and to apply?
That's a
So
gift.
that was a huge gift and a blessing, because otherwise the book would have been 800 pages and no one would have ever read it. So that was a little bit of the story behind doing the book. And as we worked on writing the book together, we also had help from a really exceptional person who, as our editor, who had actually ghostwritten 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. So he
Wow.
knew a lot about writing, and he also knew about things to do. And one of the most significant things he recommended we do when we wrote the book was to have it be something where it was not just information, but it had ideas and specific ways that people could apply it.
And start the implementation.
Because there's lots of good ideas out there. There are lots of marriage books out there. But what the difference was, he suggested to us if we would prepare a little tool so that it would not just allow, but would facilitate couples being able to essentially take the information they'd learned and make specific applications into their marriage on a weekly basis.
That's wonderful.
And that's what we did. So we created the KISS Marriage Maker to go along with it. KISS, Keep It Simple, Sweetheart, Marriage Maker. And so it's just a little tool that comes with our system that enables people to in essence, take ideas and then filter it through their own minds and experiences and decide, what do we want to do? More importantly, what do I want to do? Meaning, because both the husband and the wife need to make decisions to engage in this process, decide, what are we going to do this week to make our marriage or our relationship better? And they do.
Too many times one person will be motivated. I remember in my first marriage, I would find a good book, His Needs, Her Needs, or a marriage book. And I would say, sweetheart, do you want to read this book with me? And he didn't want to. And so what would happen was, if I started reading it, I'd get motivated and then get frustrated because I couldn't implement it and have somebody working with me on the things that the changes or the growth or the progress that I wanted to make together.
Exactly. And even though a person can be very well intentioned and try and engage in a lot of positive things, the reality is it takes 2 to make a marriage really thrive. And so, and this is going to say something a little interesting, because my wife's a little concerned about the decision I made, fairly recently. What we did, first of all, recently, is we converted the book to an audio book. So it not only is in a written format, 230 page.
Well, you know what? The more senses you involve. So hearing, reading, being able to hear it, read it, and then have questions that you have them answer.
Absolutely.
And then they're writing too.
Then they're writing it down, especially in their little KISS Marriage Maker, so they can use this. What am I going to do this week to make my marriage better? So at any rate, the point is, for any couple, because I found this also, most people are intuitively aware of this, you got to have both. If you only have one partner in a relationship that's really working on making it work, they can do some things, but it will never really go. So I made the decision recently that when we put together this, I call it it's kind of a package. It's a thriving marriage relationships system, which comes with both an audio book, but it always has 2 books, because they're guidebooks. And unless you get both of them engaged, it's one of those kind of things that sometimes sits on your bookshelf with good ideas. But this is kind of like a guidebook that enables people to actually, they answer the questions together. They look at these suggested actions that they can take. That's why we call the subtitle of our book is to nurture joy forever with the 6 practices for thriving relationships. Why do you think we call them practices? instead of principles? Because it's something you got to do. If it just stays in your head as an idea, as a conceptual, oh, wouldn't that be nice if,
But
no.
not applying it
But
to
not
your own
applying it to your own
situation.
situation, and you do it regularly. And that's one of the things that makes a big difference.
Well, I met you and your wife with sitting across from you at a recent conference a Saturday ago at the Hope for Heaven event that Nancy and Mike James put on. And you handed my husband and I each one of your books. So we were both able to hold it and open it. And I was able to glance through some of the questions. And I thought, I love this. I love when a system has questions to answer. And it was so neat because oftentimes if my husband will buy a book, like a self-help book, and I go buy another copy. He's like, why did you buy another copy? I already bought one. And I always say, because you're going to have that copy. You're going to be underlining it. You're going to be highlighting the things that are important to you. And I want to have my own copy so that I can highlight it and underline and write little notes in the margin, because this is really a system that you're doing. And so you're going to have thoughts and you're going to want to write your own messages to yourself and mental notes right there in the margins. So, Dr. Trace Tanner, we're so grateful for your talents, your wife's talent of editing. And we're going to take a station break right now, but we'll be right back to hear more about Dr. Trace Tanner's wonderful conceptual idea of thriving marriages.
From sea to shining sea and beyond, you're listening to Joy Coaching America Worldwide with show host and Joy Coach, Karen Lynn Grant.
Welcome back to Joy Coaching America. I am really excited, Dr. Tanner, to spend this time with you today and to learn about what went into your background, like the education that you had. You have become this phenomenal marriage coach, but you were a counselor before that and a college professor at the University of Utah, BYU, Salt Lake City. And now you're taking all of these wonderful years where you have been practicing and coaching and counseling and teaching, putting it into a system and making it available to all of us so that we can have thriving marriages too. So tell us, I would love to hear about your story, about your background.
Sure. Well, like I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, I felt that when determining a career direction, I felt what I need to do is to strengthen families. And what that translated into in terms of an educational program is I decided to get degrees in family relations. And while I was at it, it was kind of a composite degree in family relations and child development, because those are also a very important part of family. So I did that. But quite early on, while I was still an undergraduate, I made some goals, really rather ambitious goals. But among those goals were, I said, in my career, I want to be a university professor and a therapist, as well as do other kind of things on a prevention basis, like seminars and whatnot. So then I pursued a master's degree, which was at the time in the state of California, one of the first states to actually develop a degree in marriage, family, and child counseling. I was one of the people in the early years that ever happened. But then I wanted to get my doctorate in family relations and actually got a full ride fellowship to Florida State University, which was a top 5 university in that era for that doctoral program. So then I had this educational background to be both a professor and a therapist. Well, it still enabled me to do the other things I really wanted to do, which was more things on a preventive basis. So at that point forward, I taught at a university. I'm bilingual, so I went to Puerto Rico and I taught at a university down in Puerto Rico, and then I came back and essentially in both Orange County, California, and San Diego. that's where I got my license and practiced as well as did university teaching, and began doing seminars for couples, for parenting things. What I really enjoyed doing was marriage retreats, because I really liked working with people whose orientation was, we're not ready to go get divorced. We have a pretty good marriage, but we want to make it better. So we
Mhm.
would do these great retreats at my favorite place in San Diego was the Hotel del Coronado. And so
Mm.
we'd do these marriage retreats and would teach the couples the principles, and then they'd go walking on the beach and be able to talk about it. So anyway, those are some of the kind of things I did. But then it was really quite a bit later that my wife said, well, why don't you write a book, which I'd never planned on doing. But then, as I mentioned before, I thought, yeah, why don't we write a book? And so we did that together.
It's much more than just a book. It's a system.
It's a
And I have to
system.
tell you that I was born in Coronado, and Coronado is the most beautiful, amazing, and I love to go visit Coronado and ride on the ferry. What a perfect place for a marriage retreat.
Oh, and I loved, we did several there, and it was really a great place. And you're right. What a cool thing that you grew up or were born there.
Yes.
Wonderful place indeed.
such a
So
such a fun little town, and beach walks, and just, oh my gosh, if anybody could go do marriage retreat, take your system, go get your system, and then go to Coronado.
to the
And
Hotel Del.
that's
That's a
right.
world class place
Yes.
with a white beach, white sand beaches. It is. It's magical. It's a wonderful place. And so yes, that's where because I had my practice up in what they call in San Diego, North County.
Hmm.
But for those things, we would like to go to a great place. So that tells a little bit about what I did with that particular piece of it. But my wife's, I think, understanding was, well, you teach people all this stuff. Why don't you write a book about it? And like I said, I was initially a little hesitant because I can write, but I don't love writing. I'm
Hmm.
much more of a speaker. I'm a
Hmm.
verbal
You're
communicator
a
more than
people person.
I'm a
You were,
people.
I mean, we walked in and sat down across from you, and it was like immediately, I'm a people person too. So it was like, I want to know who you are and what you do. And you were so
We
wonderful.
connected really immediately. Yeah, we both are people persons,
Yes.
and people persons connect with one another even more so with one another than they do with others, because you
They
both
do.
have that same proclivity. So, at any rate, that's um, I decided that if I wanted to have this be to really impact more people, yes, there's a value in having it be in a book rather than just courses or retreats or whatever. So,
But what I like is that you went about it in a full 360-degree way. You did it from private one-on-one counseling sessions with people with deep troubled marriages, as well as marriage retreats with people that might have had a good marriage or a great marriage but wanted a better marriage. And so that was very interactive, and they got to associate with each other and other like-minded people and couples that were also striving to be better and do more. And then teaching students that many who weren't married at all, but laying a foundation for them to set up in their minds and in their hearts their own desire for what a good marriage would look like for them and what they wanted to bring to a marriage.
absolutely. And there's another couple of categories, just so that you know, because you fit in this category, as do so many millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of folks in this world, and I learned this when I was doing author tours all over the country, from New England to Chicago to all over, when I was, essentially getting the book out there. And what I discovered is a lot of the people that were coming to my little author presentations were people that either were or had been divorced. And it
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like, well, how come you guys are coming? And it was very clear. A lot of times people who have been through a bad marriage,
Mm-hmm.
they're more motivated than other couples because they know from a firsthand experience how problematic this is.
Well, what we know from having gone through a divorce is that you can't take it for granted, and that you can't just say, well, we said our I do's and it's going to continue without any work and effort. and that if there's broken promises, there's got to be healing, and it takes two. And so I think that like for me, having been through a couple of divorces and even annulment, I was to that place where I was like, okay, Lord, you you bring me someone who is as equally committed to creating a good marriage as I am, because I will work at it and I will play at it and I will try to do everything in my power. And now, several marriages later, I have the most peaceful, sweet marriage of 5.5 years, where I got married at 56. And it was such a long journey to get to this man. And our value systems are so similar. Our characters are so similar. And so we sat across from you and I thought, hey, Del, that would be so fun to do that together.
Indeed. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I knew a little bit of that, but not all of that. And it makes my heart warm and glowing to know that you have found the kind of a person that that is in fact that way. And really what our thriving marriage system does is it gives people very concrete tools so that even if they're not so much that way by nature or experience, they can learn. And that's one of the exciting things, because I remember when short story is I'd been in San Diego, and then I decided when our book came out in Spanish, thousands of copies went all over Mexico, the Spanish version of this.
That's wonderful.
But so I decided I wanted to work more with Latinos. So I moved up to LA, and what I discovered in LA, which is I grew up in a suburb of LA in South Pasadena. Short story is there were so many people in the LA area that kind of had this attitude about they wanted nothing to do with marriage because they'd either themselves or everybody they knew crashed and burned, and we don't want to have anything to do with this.
Mm-hmm.
But the really good news is even people who've had that experience for themselves or have seen it in others, they can learn. And that's the cool thing about when people have both the principles that work and the practices to put it to implement.
Well, I love that. People say I was a diehard because I got married several times, not all at the same time. And let's be clear about that. One after the other, and just never gave up. I never gave up. I wanted that happily ever after that I believed was possible as a little girl.
Welcome to the Loving Liberty Radio Network.
Welcome back to Joy Coaching America, raising the world's vibration to love, joy, and peace, one happy listener at a time.
Welcome back to Joy Coaching America. This is Karen Lynn Grant with Dr. Tanner, and we're having such a wonderful time discussing thriving marriages, his system, his books. You get two when you order the package because both in a couple deserve to have their own copy to highlight, to underline, and to read at your own pace, because you're going to be doing wonderful goal setting and implementing what you want to bring to the marriage, what you want to create. And you were just sharing, Dr. Tanner, right before we broke for the news, that you have been able to instill hope in the brokenhearted, in those who have lost hope, those who have given up, those who have seen maybe their parents' marriage crumble, or they've had a sad experience themselves and just want to quit. And I want to put a plug in because I've been married a few times, but I never wanted to give up, because my dearest dream as a little girl was to grow up and marry a righteous choice, obedient, noble son of God who loved the Lord more than me and who was willing to work at a marriage. And I can say that at 56, I found that. And if I would have given up, I would never have experienced the greatest experience of my life with Del Turley. And so I'm so grateful for you to offer hope today to anyone out there who might be listening, who's struggling in a sad marriage, Do you have any stories of a marriage that turned around using your system?
I'm going to use one of my most extreme examples because you wanted a specific example. This was when I was still in California operating as a therapist. And I had someone come to me as a woman who was in a lesbian relationship because she was still married to her husband, but had broken that off because she was so disaffected with what a bad relationship it was. And so she had moved to the other end of the spectrum because she found somebody that at least was, more positive toward her. But she had gone to that extreme. Once I was able to help her, and then later her estranged husband, to learn these practices, everything turned around. I don't want to be in a lesbian relationship. I want to be in a marriage with my former husband, because now my former husband is the kind of a person that I really like and that I enjoy and that supports me and gives me the nurturing that I need, et cetera, et cetera. So that was my most extreme case.
And he learned
To be otherwise than he
Yes.
was. So many people. Here's
we don't get educated.
we
before
don't get
we
educated, and that's one of the biggest generalizations that I can make, and it's a generalization, I know that, but I think most people really try and do the best they can with what they have. But the truth is, we do not live in a culture that emphasizes what it takes to have a thriving marriage. We live in a very me-oriented society, number one, just the society in general, but also people don't get training or instruction. I mean, you got to get to driver's license, you got to pass a test, but people don't get that kind of exposure to correct principles.
You know what? I just want to hop in here and share with you that that's so true, because I grew up in a religion where every Tuesday night we would go to what was called Young Women's, and our teachers and instructors would talk to us about someday you're going to get married and you need to prepare for that, and you're going to grow up and be beautiful wives, and you're going to be close to the Lord. And at the same time that these girls were having their classes, the boys were in the cultural hall playing basketball. And I often, I thought, they're getting to be better basketball players while we're building these lofty dreams of what it's going to be like to get married and live happily ever after. And I think that what a wonderful piece of education this could be for somebody who's single and who may be engaged.
Yeah.
And wants to bring their fiance with them to a course from you, or do this system together so that they can talk about these things before, so that they can see if they have identical value systems and in common beliefs and goals
beforehand. Absolutely. And I was when you brought up that example, I just started laughing because I was, as a kid, I loved playing sports, and when I was involved in church basketball and stuff, the guys in the world tend to be much more exposed to experiences that maybe make them great athletes. But as a generalization, this is not always true. But as a generalization, females tend to have a much more exposure to understanding of appreciation of a desire to focus on things that create good relationships than guys do. And so guys really need, even more than women, to get some understanding of what those principles are. And by the way, let me share something, because our book is built around what I call the 6 practices for thriving relationships.
Yes, tell us about those.
I will in a second. Well, okay, I'll tell you quickly. Share. All you have to do. I'm laughing. It makes it sound simple or easy. The simplicity is that there are 6 things: share, care, connect, confront, resolve, and grow. We'll talk about that later. But I want to go back to the thread we were talking about with men and women and what they need to get exposed to, because in reality, all of us need to do the same things, no matter where we are. And this is an opportunity for them to get exposure to that so they can and learn together. Now, you talked about, so you go through this, because our book and our system, the book has questions. And I'm going to differentiate what we have done in ours versus what so many marriage books do.
Good.
Because I'm familiar with that. I've done in that. I was in the field, 40 years. But here's the thing: a lot of questions that oftentimes get raised in books, what they in essence do is have people question well, what about this? And is your spouse doing this? And they kind of say, well, men are this way. And the point
Kind of
is
negating.
a lot of negative things. And to my way of thinking, and one of the instructions, our system comes with an instruction booklet, and what we say is, because at the end of every chapter it has 20 questions. Okay, not the game 20 questions, but 20 questions that are related to applications of these practices. But the thrust is always, how are we doing, and are there ways we can do better?
So it's positive.
It's very positive. But even in that realm, there's some areas. So I have people go through the system and go through the 20 questions, because they all each have their own book, and they say, okay, evaluate each one of these questions. If you're doing rather well, put a little 1 by it. If
and
you're doing,
are you having them evaluate themselves?
Yes.
So it's all about yourself.
How am I doing? Am I doing pretty well, rather well, pretty good job, or we need a lot more work on this? So then they do that before they then meet with one another. And they both got their books in hand with their own little, having pre-evaluated.
I love this.
And guess where they start? They start always with the ones that are the most sensitive and problematic, right? Wrong. Because if you start with the things that are most problematic, you're going to have what you want to do is reinforce all the good things. So you get them to start on the areas where they're already have done some pretty decent things, and so they can give each other some positive vibes, and they're feeling better. So then they go to the ones where it's a little bit, maybe not quite as well. But
so they've got some padding. They're padded. They're like, oh, I'm doing kind of good here. I'm doing very good here. All right, lay it on me. What am I doing not so good?
But you start with the ones where you're already doing a decent job. So you can reinforce one another, and then you got better feelings about being able to go with the ones where you're
it makes sense, because if you start with the least one first, it's going to shut down communication.
Exactly. Right off the bat. And I try and stack the deck. People can and do make decisions to get divorced or not go forward with a relationship, sometimes for good reasons. But I like to stack things in the favor of putting everything so that their chances for making it work well are maximized. To me, that only makes sense, which is why so many people really like this and it really works. And by the way, I keep saying I do this because in my career as a coach, because it kind of evolved into becoming a coach rather than a therapist, I was there able to work with people, and I can still do that. But I wanted to create a self-help system so that a couple can do this. I got to share an experience, because when I was doing marriage retreats in Southern California, one of my colleagues, we used to do marriage retreats. There were 3 or 4 of us couples, and we did them together. And so when I came out with my book, you know what his feedback about the book was? He said, Trace, this is like a self-directed marriage retreat. And I would have written this had I ever written a book, which I never got around to. But that's what we're trying to make it so that the couples can do this themselves.
I love it, because when you feel proactive, when it's your idea, you're much more probably going to devote yourself to it, rather than if it's somebody else's idea for you. It really has to come from within. Any change begins within. So I love this. This is such an exciting program. We'll be right back after these messages.
Welcome back to Joy Coaching America, raising the world's vibration to love, joy, and peace, one happy listener at a time.
We're back. Joy Coaching America. This is Karen Lynn Grant, interviewing the wonderful Dr. Trace Tanner. And Dr. Tanner, it's been fun, even in between, while there's been news going on. We've had some really fun conversations here. I think marriage is my favorite subject in the whole wide world, because as a little girl, I was programmed with a little red phonograph and a stack of 45s, and they all ended Someday my prince will come. So I was programmed as a very little girl. My mother was a Relief Society president, and I was the third daughter, and the two older sisters were at school. And I stayed and colored and listened to little phonographs all about the princesses that grew up and married the handsome prince and galloped away happily ever after. And so for me to find and to create a happily ever after became my whole life's ambition. I wanted that more than I wanted anything else, more than I wanted a profession, more than anything. And so I'm so happy to be here with you today and to bring hope to America that even if you've had some sad experiences, so have I, there's still hope. And without God, I couldn't have gotten through the things that I've gone through. But I'm so grateful for you, Dr. Tanner, to be here with me today because you've had an enduring, loving, long-lasting marriage, which is something that I always wanted. And I'm only on year 5.5. And so I'm 61 and it's on year 5.5. And I'm just, I'm going for the glory here, going for the gusto. You have 6 steps. Do you call them steps?
We call them practices
6
as
practices.
opposed to principles.
And I would love for you to share with our listening audience.
I'll be happy to do
a little
that.
bit about each one of those 6.
I'm going to define them first, make one other comment, and then go into maybe giving some examples or how they work. So the 6 practices for thriving relationships are share, which is to spend time in new and renewed shared experiences with your chosen companion. Number 2 is care, which is nurturing a best friends relationship with your husband or wife. Number 3 is connect, which is to enhance both the emotional and the physical intimacy with your soulmate. Then we have a couple that are a little bit more sensitive because they deal with more challenging areas of any relationship. The first one we call confront, which is to communicate your concerns about the tough stuff with your spouse. The next one is resolve, which is kind of part B of that same process, which is to deal with differences and resolve conflicts with your helpmate. And then we come to the last of the 6, which is kind of the icing on the cake in a way, because most couples never even get to this very well. And it's called grow, which is to refine the shared vision and spousal synergy with your life partner. And some people believe it's their eternal partner. But I want to say a couple things because people say, well, I always thought communication ought to be one of those things. But the reality about communication is a process, and it's used in at least the last 5 of the 6 practices. You got to communicate.
Well, even in share. To share, you're still communicating.
You're still communicating about what you're going to do and the cool adventures you're going to have or whatever, or the traditions you want to keep up, etc. So let me go back and address each of those briefly. And by the way, these are put in a sequence, which is in at least a theoretical way. You start with things, and whenever you're in a relationship, you begin by sharing experiences together. And then it goes further and further and further. So as it relates to what people will find in the system, share is by far the easiest and simplest for people to understand and to apply. Whereas then you get into the other things and it takes a little more understanding because they tend to be a little more challenging. But so you begin by developing a relationship based around cool things you love to do together, or you want to try new things, or you want to do the same things over and over, which become traditions in your marriage, etc. So I'm going to kind of leave that one because it's almost self-explanatory. In fact, I'm going to make a generalization now about one of, I believe, the mistakes that characterizes lots and lots of couples. And what they think is, as long as we have a great physical relationship and we do fun things together, then that's going to make it all work. Okay. Sex and fun. And so people think they're going to go on some exotic trip together, do other kind of cool things. And as long as they got a great physical relationship, then that's going to be the keys to making a marriage work. Great. That's 2 out of the 6.
Mm-hmm.
But if they've never learned the skills for dealing with problems, how do you handle differences? Every person on the planet is different from another.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens with too many couples is they feel like, oh, my wife is this way or my husband is this way and it's different than me, and how come they can't be like me? No. What people need to learn to do is how do you handle differences
I think
and
that's
resolve
really true.
conflicts.
Mhm.
And I'll move on to that. But I'm just trying to say that can be one of the areas about which couples need to have some ideas about how to understand that and then how to deal with it. When you talk about dealing with it, I'll just give you one example of this. I'm skipping forward a little bit, and that's the way I am.
It's okay.
And so I'm going to, because they're among the ways that how do you resolve things, how do you deal with differences? A lot of times it requires compromise, not always, but often. There's 4 different kinds of compromise.
Oh, this is going to be fun.
We teach people different varieties of compromise, whether it's taking turns or yielding or agreeing to disagree. And so we give people exposure to these ideas. Oh, I never thought of that. And I'll give you another idea, because most people don't ever apply this to their marriage. Most of us are aware, like in the business world, when people are trying to come up with something, let's brainstorm. Well, sometimes when a couple reaches an impasse in trying to come up with a solution to a challenge they have together, that's something they could try, is just take it out of the mindset of, oh, bashing, how come we can't get along? Let's just have a brainstorming time and see if we can come up with ideas. You don't evaluate them, you don't criticize them.
I like that. Just going to a place of neutrality and hearing the other person's ideas and say, that was interesting. That's interesting.
But first you generate a list of
But
maybe
no
half a dozen.
emotions.
And then you come, yeah, exactly. And then you come back and you evaluate them.
Mhm.
Well put. You really understand this well. So anyway, those are a couple of examples. So I want to, because I know our time is going to be a little bit limited, I want to skip to the chapter. The vast majority of couples, even those who have really good relationships, sometimes don't really understand the whole business about grow. And by the way, I'm going to make another comment about when we wrote the book and what I tell people, because it just kind of came to me, after I'd spent over 25 years doing all these things, and it just kind of flowed. But here's the thing that's kind of interesting about the practices. The grow practice is most of the things that are in our book are not new. And I'm going to give my jaded little pat answer about relationships in life, and certainly in marriage. If it's new, it's not true. And if it's true, it's not new. Why is that? Because the principles that really work have been around forever. And they're true in every culture and every period of time. So the things that we discuss and elucidate and give people ideas about how to make them work are not new ideas that Trace and Susan Tanner came up with. These are ideas that have been around, but it's so nice to be able to have. So a lot of people are going to resonate. Oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh yeah, I'm aware of that. And
part of it's being reminded
of things,
of what you know, or what feels correct, what feels intuitively right.
Exactly. And I'm going to give one other little concept, because remember I mentioned the 20 questions. Every chapter has 20 questions. They all, in essence, cover applications of that particular practice. Okay, like how do you develop a best friends relationship? There's 6 ways, there's 6 dimensions of that, including acceptance, kindness, understand. Anyway, how do you develop a best friend relationship? We teach people how to do that. But guess what question number 20 is in all of those 6 content chapters? The 20th question always asks, what have you ever learned about this practice somewhere else? Not in this book, but you've learned ideas about this practice and how to make it work. Could be from reading other books. It could be from watching a movie. It could be observing friends. So we always, because Susan and I don't have a corner on truth or on what makes a marriage great. So we always ask people, question number 20 is, what else have you ever learned, not from this system, that you could still apply and make it work?
You know what I see? I all of a sudden, this in my mind, I'm very visionary. So I saw this great big funnel, and it's like you were just gathering all of this beautiful information and funneling it into your book. And that you've created a system from all truth, pinpointing the most perfect ideas, thoughts, ideas, creative ways to go about improving a relationship, and you funneled it all right here in 6 practices.
6 practices. And remember the practices part, because if people, no matter what else they ever do, I'm going to make you a generalization that I could almost make it into a promise in a way. I'm formulating this in my mind right now, because there's lots of good ideas and there always have been. But unless, no matter what ideas, you talked earlier about, you like self-help books, you and your husband. Okay, whether it's about gardening, whether it's about refinishing furniture, or whatever it's about, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is taking that information off the pages into your mind and then into your lives and doing something about it. How many people have, even on your shelves, you might have books about marriage or relationships, or the Mars Venus thing by Gray. I mean, there's so many things. But if those are conceptual ideas, that's one thing. But if you have a system, and that's what our system does, because we have this downloadable KISS Marriage Maker so that people can every week put it in their little handheld. What am I, and then they make their own decision. What am I going to do this week to make my marriage better? Let me give you a couple of examples, okay? So, are we almost done?
We are almost done.
Okay,
we're going to have to do a part 2 soon so we can have those examples. But
Okay.
I want to tell you that this has very much inspired me to go talk to my husband and open a marriage practice. I'm so excited. This has been wonderful, Dr. Tanner. You are a joy, and this is exciting, and there's hope for marriages. This is Karen Lynn Grant, Joy Coaching America with Dr. Trace Tanner.